thank you to our panelists and to our audience, wherever you are. I don't know if I have to say good morning or good afternoon, but welcome to this panel number 4, for which I have the distinct and the pleasant privilege to chair. This panel 4 will be devoted to the following topic: reinforcing women presence and participation. And I will add involvement, because I think that involvement convey with it more active participation to peace operations missions. We all know that the role of women in peacekeeping, in peace prevention, and in peace building is crucial, is necessary, and it has a far-reaching impact. In terms of statistics, 1993, we had only 1% of uniformed personnel in the peacekeeping operation of the UN. In 2020, women represent 4.8 of the military contingents. From 1 to 4.8, one could say we multiply by 4, but it's still very, very modest figure. October 2000, the UN Security Council adopted a very important and cornerstone resolution, 1325, devoted to enhancing the role of women in peace operations. The UN strategy followed, aiming at ensuring 25% of military experts and staff officers, 15% of troops of women by 2025. Reaching this objective requires sustainable and streamlined efforts by the United Nations, but also requires that the TCCs, the troop contributing countries, assume fully their responsibilities and contribute to this end. We all know that African countries are the main providers in terms of blue helmet. And the contribution of TCCs to this objective on empowering more women in peacekeeping operations raises, as we all know, cultural problems and difficulties. To address some of the aspects of this important topic, the PCNS gathered a high-level group of eminent experts coming from different horizons and sphere of activities, who will help us compare the best practices from the African Union, from the European Union, from NATO, and even from regional economic commissions in Africa, because they also have a central role in peacekeeping in Africa. I hope that this panel will help us identify the merits, the potential, and the challenges and future perspective of empowering women and involving them substantially in peace operations missions. I hope also that we will come out with some recommendations to contribute to reforming the peacekeeping operations and enhancing their role. To do exactly that, I would like to introduce our 5 panelists. And I must say that I will not, unfortunately, because of the strength of time, I will not be able to do justice to each and every one of them. So I will arbitrarily summarize their very rich biography. Ms. Tigist Yeshiwas is a senior advisor on peace building and reconciliation in the Ministry of Peace in Ethiopia. She holds a PhD in Peace and Security Studies and Master in Gender and Peace Building. She has an advanced diploma from Columbia University and from Swiss universities. She is an assistant professor in Addis Ababa and visiting professor at Brown University, USA, and she is a humanitarian global goodwill ambassador. Mr. Younes Abouyoub is Director of Governance and State Building in the Division of MENA region in the United Nations. He was Senior Advisor of UN Special Envoy to Burundi and Yemen, and Senior Political Advisor in the Mission of Libya. He served also as a regional expert in the UN Security Council panel of experts on Sudan. Mon General Dominique Trinquand is a graduate from the Military Academy of Saint-Cyr, the Staff Academy of Camberley, and the Royal College of Defense of London. He assumed high-level staff duties and roles within international organizations, mainly European Union, NATO, and the UN. He took part in operations in Lebanon, ex-Yugoslavia, and Africa. He is president of two think tanks, the Kitchen and Le Grand Carré, and he is a regular speaker on major French-speaking and English-speaking networks. Minister and Ambassador Ramayat is Director of Atlantic Council's Africa Center, Senior Fellow for the European Center, Professor, as I mentioned before, of African Affairs at the Mohammed VI Polytechnic University, and Professor also at Sciences Po Paris. She was Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs and Human Rights, the first one in the history of France. She was also Deputy Minister of Sport, and in 2010, she was appointed Ambassador of France to UNESCO. She is a consultant, finally, she is a consultant of World Bank, and the center of her interest is human rights, Africa, child soldiers, non-discrimination, and autonomization of women. Last but not least, Ms. Annette Leginar, and I hope that I pronounced properly. She joined ISS in 2012 as head of the Peace Operations and Peacebuilding Program. During 12 years, she served as global head of peacekeeping training at the DPKO. She worked for UN in Botswana, Somalia, Liberia, and Afghanistan, and she was a military attaché of her country in London. These are the panelists that will enrich with their insights and their experience the discussion of our topics. I would like to invite them because Madam Minister has to leave earlier than expected to shorten their contribution, if possible, to 12 minutes so that we can allow for some questions from the audience. So without much ado, I will give the floor first to Ms. Tigist. Yeshiwas, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you. Good afternoon or good morning. I don't know where you are and which part of the world you are. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank Policy Center and team, colleagues for the invitation to speak and also for the excellent organization as always. I am very honored and humbled to speak among these esteemed speakers. I will be speaking about United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325, gaps and challenges, integration of gender perspective in peace operations. More specifically, how can research institutes, academic institutes help in particular to advance the implementation of women, peace and security agenda? Can you hear me, Ambassador? All right.
Loud and clear.
Perfect. I just want to make sure before I dive into my speech. Thank you. So, in order to follow my speech, I will briefly give you a brief introduction. Obviously, most of you are experts on these topics. And then try to talk about women, peace and security. Why should women be involved in peace operations and security operations? And then the challenges and gaps in the Resolution 1325, followed by some global indicators for the implementation of 1325. And finally, if time allows, few recommendations and way forward. So as a way of background and intro, as you know, 1995, the Fourth World Conference on women in China, Beijing resulted in the adoption of the Beijing Declaration Platform for Action. The platform notes governments and other actors should promote an active and visible policy of mainstreaming a gender perspective in all policies and programs, so that before decisions are taken, an analysis is made on the effects of women and men respectively. So Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action is the most obviously progressive blueprint ever for advancing women's rights and to understand and combat the key barriers to gender equality. And the document has about 12 critical areas. I will be focusing obviously on the women in armed conflict that leads to the landmark resolution 1325 in 2000. Obviously, establishing a sustainable peace, as most of you know, requires power relationship, transforming power relationships, including achieving more equitable gender relations. Since gender equality is about power sharing, it's about equity, it's about human rights, it's about dignity and respect. So to build inclusive and peaceful society, different programs on women, peace and security obviously should engage women in all aspects of negotiation, peace building, and reconstruction. Such as, a simple example would be, giving training both women and men peacekeepers to detect, address, and stop conflict-related sexual violence, support the reform in, justice and security institutions in gender mainstreaming, to ensure public services are fully responsive to women's needs. And despite, it's essential to maintain and promote peace and security, to involve women, and obviously to respect equal rights and to give equal access and full participation of women in power structures. Their full involvement in all efforts of women in prevention and resolution of conflicts are obviously essential for the maintenance and promotion of peace and security. Although women played important role in conflict resolution, peacekeeping, and defense, they are still underrepresented in decision-making positions. If women are to play equal parts in securing and maintaining peace, obviously they must be empowered politically and economically, and women should be represented adequately in all levels of decision-making. When you talk about women, peace, and security, most people often think of men, because peace and security is often associated with men. And over the decades, for so many decades, the argument was it's mostly women who go to war, it's mostly men, who start war. So why should, women be involved? And, most armed conflicts are started by men and all that sort of arguments. Yes, it's true. Interestingly, even to give you recent data, according to the armed conflict location, the ECLED report for 2020, yes, most armed conflicts are started by men worldwide. For instance, 2020 report suggests or shows that worldwide armed conflict, in fact, decreased in most countries, except in Africa, according to the 2020 report. In Africa, conflicts arise, especially armed conflict, due to identity, militia activity, because of obviously ethnicity, religion, and etc. on the rise. And the engagement of violence increased about 46%. The main reason for obviously the global decrease is due to the global pandemic of COVID-19 crisis. There was overall decrease about 22%. As demonstrate, but on the contrary, demonstration all over the world in most countries of the world increased. And yet, peace processes are again dominated by men. Women have less access and control because of power, because women have less access to power and resource. And despite various ways, despite the various ways in which women contribute to peace process, women are often excluded from formal peace negotiations and traditional institutions. Women's contribution in peace building and conflict resolution is not adequately recognized. Women's contribution has always been invisible in major books of history in Africa, including my country, Ethiopia. So women obviously should participate in equal footing with men and men in peace building and conflict resolution. Arguably, most women or women in Africa have unique capabilities, unique expertise to contribute to peace building and conflict resolution based on their experience and their values. Hence, obviously, women peace and security agenda has so many objectives, to increase awareness of international instruments such as Resolution 1325 related to women, peace and security, and obviously try to integrate or incorporate to each country context in Africa or elsewhere. So understanding why women must be involved in peace process is very important, though most wars are started by men. So next I'll try to explain why women should be involved. Obviously, women suffer disproportionately during armed conflict, and often women advocate for most strongly stabilization, reconstruction, and the prevention of further conflict, in particular in Africa setting. Arguably, obviously, peace agreements, post-conflict reconstruction, governance have a better chance of long-term success when women are involved. A great example is the Liberian women movements in 2005, back in Charles Taylor's time. There is a very interesting documentary movie entitled Pray the Devil Back to Hell. I'm sure most of you have seen that, but if you didn't see it, I highly recommend that. So it's a very practical example. When women are participated in peace operations, peace agreements have a better chance of success. This is one example. Furthermore, establishing sustainable peace requires transforming power relations, because gender equality is all about power, and including achieving more equitable gender relations. And gender equality is about power and power. So it's about equity, it's about human rights, it's about dignity and respect again. In addition, I think the other important point is involving women means that a broad range of issues that are important to the population at large, or about 50% of the population, are addressed, such as accountability for past abuses, psychosocial support for victims, restoration of health educational system, reintegration of displaced persons, refugees, trafficking of persons, and etc. So it's very crucial, obviously, to involve them. And unfortunately, there is scanty data or information available to Africa or to Ethiopian women's involvement in continental or global peace operations or peacebuilding efforts. Just to give you one example, maybe Ethiopia, for instance, deployed in peacekeeping operations a significant number of women mission in Africa countries. Currently, about 600 women are deployed. That was 2019 data. I don't have the recent data that was 2019. So about 600 women were deployed in peacekeeping mission. This is only women's number. At the continental level, as you know, the AU had appointed Office of the Special Envoy on Women, Peace and Security in 2015. And in fact, the African Union Peace and Security Council has a meeting that was convened on March 22nd, 2021, in its 987th session at the ministerial level. The agenda was on women, peace, culture, and gender, inclusive in Africa, which aimed to provide an open platform for discussing how to build gender-inclusive culture of peace in Africa. Why I mentioned this, because it's very important. The session created an opportunity to discuss further the mechanisms through which increased representation of women in peace support operations, as well as in the prevention, mediation, and peacemaking initiatives could be realized. This is the first time that the Peace and Security Council at the AU convey a ministerial high-level meeting since it's decided to have a women, peace and security agenda team as a standing agenda in 2010. So here and there are some efforts at the continental level, In fact, as a matter of fact, to give you a global representation of women in peace operations, no women have been appointed as a chief or lead peace mediation in UN-sponsored peace talks as we speak. If I'm correct, I'm stand to be corrected. I have colleagues from the UN, but as we speak, there was no any woman appointed as a chief or lead peace mediation in the UN-sponsored talks. According to the global representation of women's participation in peace process, to give you a percentage of women, about 8% of women globally participated as negotiators, about 3% of women participate as mediators, and about 2.5% of women participate as signatories. So this is a global percentage, so it's very, very low. The other point is Resolution 1325, as I mentioned, it's a landmark treaty in regards to women, peace and security. It was passed in 2002 in Windhoek, Namibia, almost 21 years ago. We know it has a huge, huge opportunity, but let me briefly talk about challenges. We have a resolution, why it's not implemented, what is the gap, and what should we do about it for better involvement of, or for better advancement of women, peace and security agenda. I think the first challenge is it's a UN document. Well, it's clear, but it's highly technical. That's a challenge. If you want to work with women on the ground, or it's quite advanced on the ground for local women. It's not only, translating into local language from English is enough, but also it's important to simplify the concepts and without losing, obviously, the content and the substance. Like, for instance, by using infographics, diagram, poster, etc. at the local level in each country specific. That's very key. The other one is obviously conflict and war. During conflict and war time, it's quite difficult to monitor the behavior and pattern of parties. It's extremely difficult to monitor, and again, it makes it difficult to fully implement. So that's quite the challenge of the resolution, despite it's a landmark treaty. The other challenge is lack of awareness on the existence of the document.
Ms. Tigist, you have 2 extra minutes. If you could round up, please. Thank you.
I will wrap up. Well, the other challenge is lack of awareness on the existence of the resolution, especially on women on the ground. Women in the ground, if they don't know about it, they will not benefit from it. So that's the other challenge. The other challenge is the absence of strategy and holding national governments accountable. Because obviously there is no monitoring mechanism whether the governments are complying to the resolution or not. And the other challenge is the resolution is seen as a women's issue, and as a result, civil societies are not properly coordinated around the resolution. That's a key challenge. Opportunity, there are lots of opportunities. Since there is no time, obviously it calls for the participation of women at all levels in decision making. Also states effective institutional arrangement to guarantee the protection of full participation of women in the peace process and significantly contribute the maintenance and promotion of international peace and security. And also, in prevention and management, resolution in peace negotiation and peace operation to train soldiers and police and civilians before they're deployed to the field on the gender equality. Also, helps to strengthen women's rights under international law. For instance, it helps or facilitates to prosecute responsible people of war crimes and genocide, crimes against humanity and other violations. And also the other key important point that I want to mention, among other things, is supporting local women's peace initiatives and conflict resolution process. So there are so many opportunities. In addition, there are 4 subsequent resolutions that came out. More importantly, Resolution 1820 is very key because 1325 doesn't recognize rape as a weapon of war, but 1820 is the first Security Council resolution to recognize conflict-related sexual violence as a matter of international peace and security agenda. Obviously, there are so many indicators on how to implement them, maybe prevention, participation, protection, and relief recovery, and to track them. I think that we have to have a closer look to see in each country context to see if they are implemented on the global indicators. There are 26 indicators around 4 pillars on prevention, protection, and women's need and relief, and women's participation. As a way of recommendation, finally, I think it was 30 seconds, I'll try to wrap up. Well, lots of awareness work on Resolution 1325 still needs to be done. And obviously gender mainstreaming at the institutional policy and program level. And academic and research organizations' role should be to do more research and for policy and recommendations on women, peace and security, and also gender-specific data and analysis and research, and also gender-sensitive language and attitude, and to do also, of course, impact assessment, and finally, lots of advocacy and lobbying. Thank you so much. Over to you, Ambassador.
Thank you, Ms. Tigist. You will understand why I will not venture to emphasize or to sum up what Ms. Tigist contributed with. I will go straight to Mr. Younes Abouyoub to tell us how the mainstreaming is working from within the system of the United Nations. Please go ahead, Younes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ambassador Loulichki, and thanks to the Policy Center for this invitation. My esteemed panelists, as you all know, peacekeeping is one of the most effective tools that is available to the UN in the promotion and maintenance of international peace and security. But we have to face the fact that peacekeeping today, more than ever, it faces several challenges. It challenges the UN's ability to deliver its mandate. I mean, political solutions have become more and more hard to reach. Missions seem to have mandates that are sometimes, of course, due to complexities of the global and regional context, these missions sometimes lack focus and clear priorities. But above all this, it's also an issue of diversity. This complexity and this complex world we live in today forces the UN, like all other global and regional institutions, it forces it to strengthen its capacity to manage this complexity. So as the number and complexity of UN peacekeeping operations continues to increase, so does the need for experienced professionals to lead and manage these missions. I mean, since the Cold War, now we have a huge number of peacekeeping missions. It has basically risen from that period until now by 400%. And with it, to manage this complexity, there is a critical need for personnel that is capable and highly skilled and diverse so they can rise up to this challenge, especially one of the challenges I've seen myself when I was in many of the field missions is the high turnover in these peacekeeping missions. So over the years, it has become clear that we need more and more qualified men and most of all, more and more qualified women. But it's not enough to have qualified women. Actually, we need to make sure that we ensure at the UN that they could participate meaningfully in these peacekeeping operations. As a matter of fact, and beyond the peacekeeping missions, the UN has to respond to this new reality. We committed to a 50-50 gender balance throughout the organizations, and that's one of the priorities of the Secretary General today. In addition, in these recent years, there has been increasing recognition of women's effort to build sustainable peace and their positive impact when they participate in these peacekeeping missions. Currently, roughly, I would say we have over 8,000 women that are deployed in 14 peacekeeping missions across the world. And more than half of them actually are whether from the police contingent or military units. However, as Ambassador Loulichki said earlier, even though the UN strives to reach the gender parity by 2030, women represent actually less than 5% of the total military or police personnel within the UN peacekeeping missions. So recruiting women and retaining them in the field, including women in the police and the military, has become more and more an operational imperative. It's no longer a luxury. Now, regarding the UN guiding framework, apart from, of course, the fact that gender mainstreaming is anchored in Security Council resolution that the previous panelists referred to, which is the Women in Peace and Security, and other resolution, there is the Action for Peacekeeping that actually, through this new initiative that the Secretary General called on member states, Security Council members, the host countries, troop and police contributing countries, also regional partners, financial contributors, donors, to renew this collective engagement that all of us have, and with the UN peacekeeping, to mutually commit to reach this level of, I would say, excellence and implementation. So to respond to these challenges and to renew this mutual commitment to peacekeeping operation, the SG has called member states to develop and agree on a set of principles. During the 73rd General Assembly, there was actually a high-level meeting on action for peacekeeping that was convened then to renew these commitments. And the objective of this initiative, A4P, that I would call the A4P initiatives, that was launched on the 28th of March 2018, is actually to establish some sort of shared understanding of the achievements, but also the challenges that are met by peacekeeping, as well as to renew collective commitments of member states to strengthen peacekeeping operations on the ground. And there was, in this declaration, a shared commitments of a number of priorities and commitments that were actually endorsed by more than 150 member states. It came up with a shared roadmap to strengthen peacekeeping missions. These 8 priorities actually, or criteria, are to deal with politics, the protection, safety and security, performance, partnerships, peace building, but most of all, which is the subject of our panel today, is women, peace and security. So, Mr. Chair, I will just briefly describe some of these positive elements of women's participations in peacekeeping missions. I take into account your request that we must be brief. Female personnel are key to success of UN peacekeeping missions. We all agree on that. They do broaden the skill set available on the ground. Their presence in the field empowers women in host communities, allows UN operations to address very specific needs of female stakeholders in conflict areas. For instance, ex-combatants, in particular during the process of DDR. It also contributes to making the peacekeeping force approachable to women and young people in local communities. Also, women peacekeepers act as role models in certain local environments. They inspire women, they inspire girls in some patriarchal societies to push for their own rights, to stand up for their rights and for participation in peace processes that most of the time, unfortunately, have been exclusively controlled and monopolized by men. Also, an increased presence of women's peacekeepers also helps ensure that the mission is aware of all the protection requirements of these local populations. For instance, the fact of interviewing survivors of gender-based violence is easier when you have women staff, women police, the police force or the military. They make things, the interaction with women easier in societies where women are prohibited or discouraged from speaking to men. I personally remember when I was in Darfur in 2008, we were in a panel that were exclusively made of men, and we had an issue actually when we were in refugee camps to try to talk to women, especially on sensitive issues like gender-based violence, for instance, and we had to resort to other staff that were not actually with the panel, but they were with the UNAMID mission then to help us reach out to women. So I know firsthand the complexities and the necessity to have women on board for these kind of missions. It is and here, because we're talking also in the framework of an Apsaco, the Africa context is important. We have to mention that Africa actually is doing much better than any other continent in these terms, because it contributes more than 3,000 women, 65% actually, and this is much larger than Africa's share to the total number of troops and police to the UN peacekeeping, which stands to up to 48.5%. This means clearly that Africa is doing better than other regions in terms of women participation in peacekeeping. And in general, if my memory doesn't fail me, female peacekeepers from the African continent come mostly from Ethiopia, Ghana, Senegal, Rwanda, and South Africa. This being said, we need to keep in mind that some troop contributing countries, actually, even if they're willing to contribute with the presence of women, may not have women in their military infantry, which impacts the number of women they can deploy in these peacekeeping missions. The UN also tries to encourage these TTC or troop contributing countries to deploy women from any military career field. As I said earlier, women make this positive and lasting impact in these peacekeeping environments because they support the women's perspective in building peace and protecting women's rights. So to encourage this presence of women, the UN introduced targets where member states who are troop contributing countries must deploy women into at least 15% of the military observers and staff officer position. And if this target is not reached, then those positions may be offered to other troop and police contributing countries that can deploy women to this position. Also, one of the initiatives that the UN launched is to support member states in their gender-related training needs. For instance, the UN supports member states and UN women to run 50-50 gender parity training programs, and the female military officers course, which is run by UN Women 4 times per year, actually, to increase the number of qualified women available to deploy in these field missions. Other initiative the UN launched recently to help increase the percentage of women. For instance, previously, if a member state chose to rotate members out after every 6 months, the cost that is incurred had to be borne by the member state itself, as the UN policy, as you probably know, Mr. Ambassador, caters only for 1 rotation every 12 months at the cost of the United Nations. So now this has changed, which is a good news. The women peacekeepers with children under the age of 7 are able to deploy for a period of 6 months instead of 12, which is the usual period, and they would be entitled to repatriation at the expenses of the UN, not the troop contributing country. Also, because this is an issue that does not only concern the international organization, it also concerns regional, sub-regional, and bilateral efforts. So it is something that we have to work on as one. Of course, as was mentioned earlier, the picture is not rosy. There is slow progress. Despite this great strides we tried to achieve, the parity is not yet there. In January 2021, less than 1/5 of the military experts, these are the recent statistics, experts on missions and staff officers were women, and made only 5% of personnel in military units. Yet, 2 women are currently serving in the most senior military level within the 12 field missions we have now. One is the newly appointed force commander in the peacekeeping mission in Cyprus, and the other one is deputy force commander in the MINURSO mission in Morocco. Let me close now with the very few recommendations, and then we can always touch upon other things during the debate. We all agree here there is an operational imperative that the UN recruit and retain female peacekeepers. This, we all agree, renders peacekeeping operations way more effective. Diverse leadership and teams bring diverse perspectives, so we can better make decisions and improve our operations in field missions. There is then need to ensure that this lack of diversity is rectified and those barriers are broken so that women can really meaningfully make it to the top positions in these missions. More initiatives are needed. I've mentioned some of them, but we need more. So to can empower women's leadership in different roles and positions. Example initiatives focusing on gender parity, such as, for instance, professional development, networks, mentorship, talent management, and workplace culture. Additional initiatives should be put in place to combat sexual harassment, discrimination, subtle or unconscious biases and stereotyping. And we need definitely to urge troop contributing countries, because without them we cannot have personnel in field missions. We need to urge these TCCs and all peace contributors to recognize gender equality, women, peace and security, and gender parity as shared political priority and responsibility. And then we have to allocate more resources to this cause. I mentioned earlier that one of the critical needs for personnel in the field missions is compounded by the high turnover in peacekeeping missions. People do not stay, so it's problematic to keep staff for a long time. So therefore, it is urgent to enforce mobility programs at all levels within the UN to offer career paths to staff as incentive to join and stay within the UN, because a lot of people, they realize if they're there and stay for way too long in field missions, they don't have career perspective, they would not stay. It is true that the situation is not perfect, but I believe that the road is still long, but there is definitely steady progress. Increasing women's participation in peacekeeping missions around the world at all levels should continue to be a priority for the next phase, as we are now heading towards 2030 full parity benchmark, and also 2030 is the year of implementation of sustainable development and Agenda 2030. So I'll stop at this stage. I hope I didn't go beyond the 10 or 12 minutes. I thank you for your attention and look forward to questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Younes, for sticking to the timeline. And I move to General Dominique Trinquand. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the briefing provided by the two panelists before me. As you call me a general, I will speak like a soldier. So in practical terms, what I found on the ground. First thing is that we are always talking about gender equality, but we go back to a very simple figure. Half of our humanity is made of women. And so we are, when you are involved in a peacekeeping operation, you know that your soldier will meet as many women as men. And so to meet these women, the fact to have women inside the force is of major importance for several very practical reasons. When you want to screen a woman, it's better to have a woman. In certain country, you can't screen a woman with a man. Higher reporting on sexual abuses, for example, when you've got women, they are more focused on this subject. And so the reports come back very fluidly and very and better. Another point, which is probably more a psychological point, where we say that usually women are less confrontational. And so inside the troop, it's better to have women because it's calmed down the atmosphere in the troop. You were providing figures on the UN troops. I must say that you've got three sort of figures. The officers and all ranks, and the military and the police. In the police, the figures are quite good. In fact, when you look at the police, the figures are quite good. Mainly in the experts, you've got more and more women. But the country must not cheat. When I'm saying cheating is when they put an FPU with only women. So they are very happy because the figure of the number of women is of course increasing, but we don't achieve the aim of the troop, which is to have more women inside the contingents. I think I haven't heard, but I think it's very important, is that when you've got people who are participating, let's say soldier or police officers, participating in peacekeeping operation, the aim you want to achieve is not only to improve the peacekeeping operation, but to improve the TCC, meaning when the people are coming back in their country, they have improved their professionalism, but also the way they are looking at maintaining peace or interconnection with the people. And I think the more women you've got, the more improvement you will have back in the country of the TCC. But currently we've got a difficulty, is that a lot of country, and we're talking of Africa, of course, but it will be the same in Europe. I mean, you've got people, you've got more and more women coming into the system, but it takes time. I just give a figure given by a Minister of Armed Forces in France when she was saying we want more French women general, and the Chief of Staff tell him, yes, ma'am, but it's take 30 years to have a general. And 30 years ago, we have very, very few women. And so it takes time. So I think really that the figure you gave initially on the target given by UN are good targets, and UN must stick to this target, but it will take time to have this figure completely fulfilled. And if you just look at what the figure for police, for example, head of police, currently you've got 43% of the head of police. I mean, I'm talking about police commissioner who are women. But I was smiling when you gave me the figure of 2 FC or DFC who are in peacekeeping operation, and you quote Cyprus and MINURSO. You perfectly know that in the UN system, MINURSO is only an observer mission, so not really a military mission. And Cyprus, I will not dwell on Cyprus, is a very long mission and with a very small importance. So when we'll have a force commander in MINUSCA or in MINUSMA or UNAMED, that can change something. But it will take time because you've got very few systems where you've got generals, for example, who are women, sometimes in services, sometimes in Air Force, but in the army, where you've got the majority of peacekeepers, it's a bit difficult. So I just go back to my practical thing and say 3 things. First, peacekeeping with women is good for peacekeeping, but it's good for TCC. They need to change. I'll just give you an example. We were, in my capacity now, I'm preparing contingent for peacekeeping operation, and I was mixing with the contingent, and I say, you know, you've got to have women. And very proudly they say, yes, we've got 2 women in a battalion, 2 women. I say, what are they posting? Oh, they are working in the kitchen. I say, no, that's not fair. You know, you need to have women because you will need women when you will be on the ground, when you will arrive in a village. You can't connect only with the man. You need to connect with a woman, and only a woman will do that. And on the second turn, the contingent perfectly understand and put more women in the contingent because you need them in the patrol. You don't need them in as a secretary or at the back office. You need them in the patrol, and that's very important. So the first thing is that it is very important, not only for the peacekeeping, but for the TCC. The second point I'm meaning, there is no discussion. We have to increase the number of women because we have to interconnect with more women on the ground. The third point is that it will take time, but the figures are right, and the target provided by UN is fair, and we must work on that objective. So this is the end of my briefing. As a military, always very short. Thank you.
Merci, mon général, and I give the floor direct.
Thank you, General, dear General. I would like to give the floor without further ado to Madam Minister and Ambassador Ramayad. Please, you have the floor.
I'm supposed to leave just now. I'm sorry. I thought I will have spoken before. So I'm sorry to be very, very quick. I'm delighted to participate in this session dedicated to reinforcing women's presence and participation in peace operation missions. Thank you, Ambassador Loulichki, for having me on your roundtable. My greetings to the Policy Center for the New South, a dear partner of the Atlantic Council's Africa Center. May 29th was the date of celebration for peacekeepers. So it is critical and a very good idea to have focused on this topic of gender in peacekeeping operations. It's a very important issue. It is not a question of numbers, but also of our effectiveness in fulfilling UN mandates. Women can and must play a leading role in political participation, conflict resolution, and the transition from conflict to peace. That's my my belief, and not only mine. A few years ago, it was in 2014, we lived an important moment in the history of the United Nations peacekeeping, when Major General Kristin Lund from Norway was appointed as the first female to serve as former commander in the United Nations peacekeeping operations. It was in Cyprus. That was indeed, that was a historical turning point. And it was an acknowledgement of the implementation of the year 20,000 UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security. As it was said previously, that resolution highlighted a shift in UN policy to engage more females in peacekeeping operations around the world. It affirmed the role of women in the prevention and in resolution of conflicts. What is important here is to understand this effectiveness claimed through women. Women, when it appears there may be specific roles that are better suited to female officers than their male counterparts. One important advantage of women, female peacemakers have, is tremendous. Being a female, when you are deployed in a country like Afghanistan or the DRC, you are better. You are able to better protect civilians, because civilians, they need a comprehensive intelligence. Mission leaders and force commanders need to be able to map threats and identify armed groups and the leaders for effective planning. They need to analyze behaviors. They need to be close to children and women. And women and children are the main victims of violence in such conflicts, particularly sexual violence. And it is often difficult for male soldiers to cross social and cultural boundaries required to build this trust. This is where female peacekeepers can fill a gap by providing women and children with a greater sense of security, but also being able to foster that trust, and in the process gather valuable information for their mission. Studies conducted by the UN support of the Resolution 1325 from experience in operations in African countries like Liberia or DRC, but not only, have demonstrated that female soldiers do not face the same cultural restrictions as their male counterparts, and are able to gain information from women and children. This ability to gain the trust of local populations should be considered as a vital component of any peacekeeping operations. That's the case, for example, in the DRC, through the interactions with the local populations, and it helps to reduce conflicts and confrontation. The UN has called for more female peacekeepers. We know that, to enhance the holistic approach to current peacekeeping operations. But clearly, there is more work to be done there to integrate these female peacekeepers into UN missions, more skilled, more trained female peacekeepers. You can see, of course, that women's role is important, but only, in the past, they were only, in 1993, 1% of all deployed uniform personnel as women, but now almost less than 30% of the international civilians working in peacekeeping and special protection missions, and only 6% of uniformed military, police, justice, and corrections personnel in field missions. That is not enough, and this gap has very obvious explanations, like the lack of understanding among member states about the UN resolution on this issue, the gap in data and analysis about women participation in national security institutions and in UN peacekeeping in particular, and the social norms and bias, that perpetuate gender inequality in security sectors. So we don't have here just to find role models like Lund mentioned earlier, or to give awards like last year. Major Steplin Nyaboga of Kenya received a military gender advocate of the year award for her role in Darfur, for example, on sexual violence and political marginalization. All this is very important because those voices deserve to be heard. Female peacekeepers need these champions, as Secretary General said. But I really think that if we want effective missions, what to do is to increase insights from peace operations mission in Africa, is to integrate gender perspectives, is to empower operations, is to draw consequences of experience of women. There are so many solutions and actions to be led to foster and empower, to foster gender issues and empower women in female organizations in peacekeeping operations.
Thank you, Madam Minister and Madam Ambassador. And I do apologize. I thought that with 12 minutes we could have you for more than the 7 minutes that you took. But I think you eloquently demonstrated that you can say in 7 minutes what you can say in 15 minutes. So thank you for your presence. Thank you for your contribution. And I owe you the extra 7 minutes next time we meet in any of the upcoming webinars. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Minister. Thank you. We appreciate your presence. Thank you.
Me too. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me now turn to our last panelist, Miss Annette Leginar, coming from South Africa and having already worked with the United Nations and having both experiences from Africa and the UN peacekeeping operations, to enlighten us about her take on how to empower more women in peacekeeping missions. Please go ahead, Ms. Annette.
Thank you, sir. And I just want to apologize immediately. We've got load shedding in South Africa. So if the lighting in my room is not that good, I want to apologize for that.
Well, mine is worst. So do not apologize. If there is any blame, I will have the monopoly.
Thank you, sir. I put a heading to my presentation that I will send to Apsaco, that I need to finalize, is how to lie with statistics, the myths of women, peace and security, and the African reality. Thank you for your attention. I'm talking about women, peace and security in stats, and I've got a little booklet that I've had since 1976 about how to lie with statistics. And it says, If you have a barrel of beans, some red and some white, there's only way to find out precisely how many each color you have. Count them. I want to refer you to a presentation that I did in NATO in 2000 when I was invited, when I was the Global Chief of Peacekeeping Training in DPKO, and they asked me to come and do a presentation on enhancing the role of women in peacekeeping operations. And I indicated at that time that in the South African National Defence Force, where I served for nearly 30 years, it represented 18% of women. During my presentation, I also discussed the challenges on how to promote women's participation in peace operations. Has anything changed? No, to the contrary. Women's participation in peace operations has shown a downfall, and I will not go into the statistics that I prepared in my presentation. However, I also asked this question in related discussions. What is the percentage of male nurses in your country? The reason being, the nursing profession has been by tradition a female-dominated environment. The same accounts for the military and to a lesser extent to the police. The UN is a mirror of its member states. On what is the average percentage of women in PCCs and TCCs and civilians in peace operations? I've asked the question several times. If country X has 5% of its population in its armed forces and police, the UN's average should be accordingly. Why do we expect the UN to have targets of 20 to 30% of women in peace operations? Notwithstanding the stats, let's get to the myths of women in peace operation, in the peace operations environments. And due to time, I will keep it to one of the myths that I think is most critical. And I'll just scroll down my presentation. And it is, why do we need to justify women's participation all the time? All our male colleagues do not need to do this. Women making up half of the world's population should be able to participate simply because it is their right. The gender balance in society should reflect of the peace negotiations at the table and in other environments. I will then want to take you to another presentation and article that I wrote a year and a half ago on the importance of women in mid-level management in AU peace operations. Why did I highlight this in an article I wrote? If you look, and I am glad we have a French military general who will understand my language. If you look at the strategic level and you look at the tactical level, where is the most critical point where strategy is implemented in operations, and that is at the mid-level? we see and often get acknowledgement of force commanders and SRSGs in Cyprus and all over the place. That's not where decisions are made. Decisions are made and implemented on the operational level, where we have too few females. And I called the article Mind the Middle Management Gap. We've got soldiers, police constables, and civilians all over the place in peace operations on the lower level, and then we boast about all the females in top senior positions. Where does the strategy becomes implemented to go to the field and to the tactical level? It's on the operational level. And that is exactly not only about women, but also men, where we need far more competent people to implement, whether it is about SGBV, sexual gender-based violence, whether it is about sexual exploitation, etc., about women. Where do women play the most critical role? It's at the operational level, and that is exactly where we have the least women in all my research I've done. To implement strategy to the tactical level, where soldiers, police officers, and civilians have to be deployed. I will move on and skip a number of things, and for the people at Apsaco, I will share my complete presentation with you. And I want to share with you one or two very critical, important issues. The trend of women in peace operations and every aspect of that in the UN prevails, that despite repeated calls for more women in peacekeeping since 1325 was adopted in 2000. At the current rate of recruitment and retention, it will take 703 years to reach equality at management level in UN missions. I know we have only got a few people listening to this discussion, but it is critical to understand that this is not acceptable. To save time, I will skip a lot of my presentation, and I will refer you to one or two aspects of experience in Africa, and I will refer to the first deployment of the Indian formed police unit to Liberia. Why was that successful and in other ways constrained? With the SRSG at that time, and I was in Liberia when they were deployed, was SRSG Illinois, and the deputy for rule of law was Henrietta Monsubanso from Ghana. Why did it work? They had role models within the mission. They had role models and were trained according to specs. I will not elaborate about the successful deployment and the constraints of the FPU in Liberia. There were several constraints. Coming from a military background, I think the FPU is something that should have been gendarmerie or something else. However, what was the biggest success of deploying the FPU in Liberia? It was encouraging Liberian women that became part of the Liberian National Police Force, of having an example of women who encouraged them to become police officers. It's a long history and we can talk a lot about it. I want to jump immediately to a next example, and forgive me if I'm very short on a number of issues. I want to refer you to an African Union appointment, because we constantly refer to the United Nations, but we are Africans. I'm a born African, and we need to support the African Union in the activities we are undertaken. And I have been involved in the enhancement of the AU police for the last 9 years. And I want to share with you that Christine Alulu from Uganda was appointed, I think, in 2015 as the Deputy Police Commissioner to the mission in AMISOM. Why was she appointed? And I have to make one or two critical statements here. She was competent, she was well-trained, she was more than equal. She competed against 2 men for the position. She got the position because she was the best qualified woman. We should not underestimate that if we want to deploy women peacekeepers, either in a civilian or a military or police capacity, they need to be competent. She became the police commissioner in AMISOM, and I'm so sad to say that in the Ethiopian air crash in, I think, 2017, she lost her life. But she was a true example of a competent woman who went through the ranks, who was well trained, and who was able to compete with men. I'll give you one example that is not African based, but which when I served in Afghanistan, and this relates to civilian women. I, at a point, and I served there for several years, said to my male Afghan colleagues, I want to employ Afghan female civilians in a security role. What I did is I set up a TOR, we prepared everything, we interviewed women, and the purpose was that women at the gates of the Jalalabad compound and the other compounds could search female civilians who were working in our different compounds physically. Long story short, we employed them, and it was a rigorous process where I had to educate my male counterparts on how to deal with Afghan women. I also had to get all these Afghan females, families, their parents, their husbands, etc., to explain to them the role that these women would play. It was a hugely successful employment. I want to use that example to share with you. It's not only civilians, it's not only police, it's not only military. There I want to highlight also the role of, and I know it's changing, the role of the country teams. The UN country teams have a massive role in enhancing the role of females in peace operations. As my UNICEF colleague said one time in Afghanistan, we've been here for 80 years. UNAMA will disappear in 20 years and we will still be here. It's a very important aspect, and I know there is a lot of work being done on the resident coordinator's role in collaboration with peacekeeping missions. If I have some time left, sir, interrupt me if I am over my time. I want to use myself as a last example. I'm an African-born, white African. I served in the military for about 30 years, and I served in the UN for about 12 years, and now I am a member of the Institute for Security Studies. I want to highlight 2 points. It has been extremely difficult as a woman serving in the military, getting into the UN, where I was appointed as the global head of peacekeeping training for DPKO. My first boss could not accept a woman. I had to just be competent, do everything better. And in the second year, I got another boss who was extremely well equipped to deal with women. My last example, I always wanted to serve in Afghanistan as the chief security advisor. Who was my main obstacle? A woman. In several parts of my career, sir, and I've been working for 47 years, the main obstacles in promoting gender equality and equity have been women, because several women throughout my career said, I've struggled to get on to the top. You can struggle as well. And my last comment, sir, we need men who can support competent, well-equipped and well-trained women to get there where it matters. And that is my final comment. Let's do it at the operational level. In the UN and in the AU, we then talk about women and men from the P4 to approximately P5 D1 level, who are deployed to sectors where the tire hits the ground and where it matters to have competent people in competent positions that are supported by men and women. I thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mrs. Annette, for your contribution. We are coming close to the time allocated to this panel, but I have a few questions. I will select 3 or 4, and I will beg you to give your responses as shortly as possible. Let me read the let's say 3, 4 out of about 7 or 8 in the order that they came. First, how has the Women, Peace and Security Agenda impacted mandates of current multi-dimensional resolution in terms of gender in Africa? 2, we tend to speak on including more women into peace and security sectors, or the structures more amenable to women. Third question, how to reinforce the political will at the highest level to take issues of gender equality beyond mere representation, namely in peace operation mission. And I think on this third question, I think Mrs. Annette gave a very comprehensive answer, so I will skip this one. The last one, women still suffer from negative stereotypes and resistance against their inclusion, especially in decision-making positions in peace operations how to change these perceptions. So these are or the question that I arbitrarily selected because of this because of the short time that is left, and it's up to our panelists to give a short answer to 1, 2, or the 3 questions as quickly as possible. Thank you. Who is volunteering?
Well,
I will go, Ambassador. Okay, go ahead.
No, please, ladies first.
Okay, go ahead, Ms. Tigist.
Thank you. I think I will try to I will try to respond to the question related to 1325 Women Security Resolution. Well, I think since it's passed in 2000, in Africa at least about 30 countries, 30 are in the process of preparing NAPS, the National Action Plan. I think in the world about 81 countries. So out of 81, 30 is in Africa. So it's a good number. But obviously it's quite different from, country to country, depending on country's context and law, because in order to integrate and, apply to national law, it has its own procedure. For instance, in Ethiopia, where I'm familiar, I can give you an example. We don't have NAP, unfortunately, because there was a resistance in 1325. It was mandated before, like 3 years ago at the Foreign Affairs Office. The reason was 1325 on Women, Peace, Security Resolution is specifically for countries who are in conflict and war. And their justification was back then was we are not in a war or conflict, so we don't need the resolution. So there was some pushback. But recently, it was moved to Women Youth Ministry. So they're in the process of, trying to integrate it into local laws, because that's on procedure. It has to be published in the Nagarit Gazeta and then translated into local language and then approved by Parliament in order to be integrated to, local laws. So it has its own challenges. That's why it's very context specific. But then what added, again, related to that question was, I think because of time, I didn't elaborate, but subsequent resolutions came out and the UN adopted after 1325, Resolution 1820, which was passed in 2008, recognized conflict-related sexual violence. Resolution 1888 that also passed in 2009, strengthens the implementation of 1820. And Resolution 1889, which was passed in 2009, addresses obstacles of women's participation in peace process and peace building. And Resolution 1960 that was passed in 2010 provides accountability for implementation of 1820 and 1889. So these 4 resolutions resolutions on women, peace and security mentioned should be taken together, adopted resolutions to present the critical framework for improving the situation of women in conflict-affected countries. And then maybe the last question, what should we do to, women still suffer on negative stereotypes, especially in decision-making and on perceptions? I think we have to do lots of awareness work. We have to educate, we have to integrate, gender, the curriculum in informal settings, to change the attitudes and biases we have. And it starts from parenting, to be gender sensitive in our language, not to, raise our voice and girls saying women is weak and men is aggressive and strong. And it starts from attitudes. So we have to educate. And of course, academic and research institutes has to work in gender-specific data collection and analysis in their research, and making sure that equal access to and utilization of services is given, for boys and men at different levels. That's very key. One way of challenging, the stereotype, and obviously making sure that women and men are equally involved in decision-making. That's how we tackle it.
Thank you, Ms. Tigist. if you can conclude, you have 30 seconds.
All right. And for political will commitment, my last comment is obviously gender mainstreaming, integrating gender mainstreaming at policy, you know, at policy level, at institutional level, and at the programs to have, you know, strong political commitment. Institutional level gender mainstreaming is very effective, but it takes longer term. So we need to have that political commitment in our by our politicians. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I will give the floor to Mon Général Dominique Trinquand, and then Mr. Abouyoub, and last but not least, because you have you were the last one to take the floor, to Annette, and I will conclude maybe in 1 minute. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got nothing really to add to the question which were posted by the people. But I just want to focus on what Annette Leja just have said, and really the right point, which is middle management. I was talking on tactical level, of course, which is very important too, to interconnect with the people on the ground. Of course, tactical, but inside a team, the need of having women inside the team to have a different reflection, and certainly the way of thinking, which is of course different, men and women. I will not give you the example, are different, and that's why we need these differences inside the team. And so middle management is very important. And you're right, it is fine to put a force commander with a woman force commander somewhere, and then you can say, raise the flag and say, we reached that. But the most important thing is middle management. But as I said, it will take time, because in African Army, you've got very few women currently, and you need to take time to educate, to form them, and to reach the P4, P5 level. But I completely agree with you. Thank you.
Thank you. See Abouyoub.
I would echo what my previous colleague said. I mean, regarding stereotype issues, it's a major issue, and it goes beyond the UN. It goes beyond the issue of gender. It's a multicultural environment, the UN, of course, but unfortunately, people come up with their own preconceived ideas, biases, whether it's gender, it's religion, it's ethnicity. And even from my experience when I was in the field, you have a tendency of having people gathering as groups coming from the same nationality or coming from. So it's not easy to break that, but definitely education and cultural shift is necessary to do that. Regarding the political will, as Ms. Annette said earlier, at the end of the day, the United Nations is a reflection of its member states. So it's what the countries and the member states want. It's the way the UN acts. So the changes of the political will and enforcing that political will, of course, should come from member states first. Then it's the UN could do its part, but it's not easy to do it in reverse, as you probably know. So it's whatever the member states want. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Abouyoub. Mrs. Annette, please.
Thank you, sir, and thank you for allowing me for the last word. We should stop number crunching when it comes to women in the United Nations peace support operations. What we should focus on is having competent people that are well qualified, that are well trained, and are equal as we expect people to be in terms of the competencies and their awareness of everything when it comes to peace operations. Women are not a less gender. We are equal to men, and we need to be treated as equal. But when we compete, we need to be as competent. And I'm also working with Ethiopian training of police officers, etc., and right through Africa. And I can tell you that the people we train and the people we deploy, whether they are men or women, need to be equally equipped. And if we are equally equipped, we can deal with issues like sexual gender-based violence. We can deal with anything, because the competence of men and women, when it comes to their performance, and they are equally trained and equally enabled, we have empowered them equally to do a good job. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, and thank to all of you for participating to this panel. Let me just emphasize a few points that I think are of a paramount importance. The first one is that the Resolution 1325 triggered a dynamic within the peacekeeping operations and to reinforce the participation and the contribution and involvement of women at all stages of the peacekeeping operations missions. Two, that what is important is not only to appoint women at the top level, but as it was mentioned and confirmed, that it had also to be in the middle management, provided that competence is equal. Three, I think there is a key point, which is the role and the contribution of the TCCs. It is of extremely importance. The TCCs will reflect in their participation in peacekeeping operation missions exactly their culture, exactly their domestic agenda in promoting and empowering women. And this is linked to that. And I think the example that were given about African countries that have sent more women illustrates exactly that. It's the one that have almost 50% in the parliament and in the government that are the ones that are sending more women to the peacekeeping operation. 4, training is of great importance because it brings a blue helmet to the United Nations, aware of not only their rights, of also their obligations in terms of duties, in terms of protection of civilians, in terms of preventing the sexual abuses, etc., etc. Nobody is questioning the assets and the positive impact that women can bring to peacekeeping operation missions in terms of credible protection, as it was mentioned, less confrontational atmosphere, and reporting and preventing sex abuses, and easy access to local population. And finally, these dynamic requires time and patience and political will. And I would end with Africa. Africa has demonstrated that it can lead on some of these aspects. So let's all endeavor that Africa will continue also to promote in its own dynamic within the APSA, the African architecture, this dynamic of empowering more women to contribute to all stages of the conflict, whether it is preventive, whether it is peace building, national reconciliations, etc., etc. I know that I did not, this is not a very comprehensive summary of what has been said, but this is subjectively what I think are the most important elements that we have discussed. I thank you again very, very much. And I hope that next year we will see you not virtually, but in the policy center in Rabat, inshallah. God willing. Thank you very much and have a nice day and keep safe. Continue to keep safe.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.